A decade ago, when I was getting into bass fishing, I read, I saw, I heard all the pros swearing up and down how awesome a chatterbait is for catching big bass. I heard them say, man, I've won so much money fishing tournaments on this bait right here. I tried using chatterbaits at first and I caught very few fish on them. Plus, the few bites that I did get, a lot of times they would get off. It was really stressful for me. So I got away from them, just stopped using them altogether. But I kept hearing about it over and over and over again. This chatterbait, blah, blah, chatterbait. Bladed jig is the other term they use. So I decided to revisit it, and I started catching more bass on it from a few different things that I tried, but I still couldn't quite keep them on the hook. I literally reached out to Brett Hite, the creator of the Z-Man jackhammer, arguably one of the best bladed jigs on the market. Told him my frustration with losing fish, and he, super cool, gave me some really awesome tips about fishing a chatterbait that I'd never known before. And it has game changed my chatterbait bass fishing this season. So in this video, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what I use, what I've learned, and 5 mistakes I made that you can avoid with your own chatterbait fishing to be way more successful. Hey, real quick, you know, one of the cool parts of what I'm doing is that people have reached out and told me that they've caught more bass, they've caught their personal best, biggest bass they've ever caught before off of a tip that they've heard from me. This is crazy. This is wild. That's why I want to create content, and I want to see more of that. One of the questions I get asked over and over again is there some kind of faster way where you can see all my methods and the different techniques? Well, the answer is finally yes. I took a step back and looked at what decisions I make to pick what lures to use, then put that into a 30-minute masterclass. Totally free. You can click the link in the description below and get access to this masterclass. Now back to the video. All right, let's talk about these chatterbait mistakes. What I'm about to say is going to be a little bit controversial. I guess you could say that. And let me start by saying, this is not the only way to catch bass on chatterbaits, right? There's so many different opinions on what works and what doesn't. I have been using chatterbaits for a long time. I'm a professional bass guide. I'm trying this stuff out because I want my clients to catch fish. Tried all the different kinds that they have, and I'm not going to be able to cover everything from all of my years of experience. I'm going to talk about the general rule of thumb principles of what you need to know about chatterbaits that most people miss out on. And these things have made the biggest difference for me, for sure. So let's get cooking. Mistake number 1, blade color. A lot of the chatterbaits I first had came with gold and silver blades. Still today, that's the case. And that's how I started, right? I threw those silver blades and those gold blades, and yeah, they would catch fish occasionally. But one day I noticed one of my local anglers, and he had colored his blades with a Sharpie black. I thought, that's interesting. I'm wondering why he's doing that. And then it really kind of dawned on me like, oh, you know, silver and gold are really bright and really flashy. Sometimes isn't the most natural look for a bass, right? So I started using blades that weren't silver, that weren't gold. I used the blades that were black, that were green pumpkin, were a lot more natural, and I started catching a lot more fish, especially in clear water where it can make a real big difference to have a more natural presentation. So make sure you're looking at the blades and picking the right ones. Mistake number 2 is poor retrieves. I remember first testing out chatterbaits, chuck them out there, you wind them back. Pretty simple lure, right? Sometimes when I'd throw it, I'd be successful. Other times I wasn't. Then I watched a pro tournament in Florida and I noticed something that I'd never noticed before. Everybody was throwing chatterbaits, but they were working it different than how I was traditionally working it. They weren't just casting it out there and winding it back. They would cast it out there, let it fall down into the vegetation. They'd reel it, and when it would hit stuff, they would rip it. They were reeling it and ripping it. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. A lot of times after they would rip it, oh, I got one. they would load up with a big old bass. So I started doing the same thing. When I was throwing a chatterbait, I would throw it into the vegetation, the cover. When it bumped stuff, I'd rip it through, and holy cow, that is a big difference maker. I started catching bigger fish doing it that way. And that's been a real key for me, is making sure that it's getting down into the cover, you know, reel it fast enough to where that blade is vibrating and you can feel it. There's like a happy speed, right? If you reel it too fast, it rises too high up out of the water. You reel it too slow, the blade doesn't vibrate. So you got to find that speed. Use your rod to feel what's going on with the chatterbait, and then when it bumps something, you rip it through it. How I like to do it is I'll cast it out, let it fall all the way to the bottom, and then I'll begin my retrieve. I'll usually pop it off the bottom real quick to get that blade spinning, make sure I'm feeling that blade. If I don't feel the blade, I rip it again. You know, keeping that pulsing rhythm has been a definite game changer for me. Try this, you'll for sure catch a lot more fish on a chatterbait. Mistake number 3, wrong areas. Just because the chatterbait can catch fish doesn't mean it's gonna catch fish everywhere all the time. Looking back, I remember when I started fishing the chatterbait, I would fish it in a lot of open water around rocks and brush piles and stuff like that, places where I've always caught bass in the past. Sometimes I would catch them, but it was never like lights out cooking, you know what I mean? I observed that people that were fishing chatterbaits were usually fishing more heavy vegetation like grass and weeds and that kind of stuff. And the reason they do that is because it will go through the grass and cover really cleanly compared to like a crankbait where you have all those exposed treble hooks and they would snag up easily. So that's what I do now. I throw a chatterbait when I'm in really thick, heavy vegetation, and that's when it really seems to work really well. Or I've found when the water temperatures are colder, those vibrating blades really draw strikes, especially in the early spring and late fall. No matter when you watch professional fishing, if they have a cold water early spring tournament, those guys are throwing chatterbaits because that vibration elicits those responses in the cold water. Those are the times, those are the areas to throw a chatterbait if you want to catch them. Let's take on mistake number 4. I have tried so many different trailers on the back of the chatterbait. I've even taken the skirts off. I've used them without trailers, swim baits, craws, flukes, lures that are specifically designed to be chatterbait trailers. And through all my experimenting, what I've found is most important with trailers is just to make things match. Let me talk about this. I find that pairing up similar colors is what really works well for your trailer. You know, white on white, black on black, green pumpkin with green pumpkin. Make sure things are compact and match and look really well. Let me show you a couple. Like right here, this is a green pumpkin jackhammer with a green pumpkin blade minnow with a little bit of a pearl blade. Look how good that matches, right? It's just a nice natural matching color. You can see I've worn this sucker out, it catches them. Now when I'm fishing a little bit dirtier water, you know, I got this chartreuse one here with a little bit of a white belly, like that's what the skirt looks like. So that's the trailer I'm going with, just something like that. It makes a big difference. Personally, I prefer the trailers that are designed for chatterbaits, like the Jaco here. I really like this one from Crush City, it's a good one. And then the other one I use is this blade minnow. The Crush City kind of has a brighter color to it, so I don't use that one unless it's a little dirtier, but the green pumpkins, the naturals in the clear water, that's what I like. And that's been a big key for me, is just making sure things match so that they look natural in the water and make sure you get those baits on straight. Okay, mistake number 5. I was out smoking the bass on a 1/2 ounce chatterbait. Green pumpkin, actually it was this one right here, the one I just showed you. Just absolutely tearing them up, right? This one too, just destroying it. Look at the bottom of it. I was throwing that guy, catching fish after fish after fish, and my skirts were falling apart. My trailer was falling apart. Like, man, my hook was kind of getting dull. I think I need to change out this lure. So I changed it out and I went to identical color and I started throwing that thing same areas, same, and I just wasn't catching them as good. And I was like, what is the deal? Why am I not catching them on this lure like I was the other one? And you might have already guessed it, but it was the weight. The weight of the bait was key. The 1/2 ounce, as you can see why this one's all chewed up, it was getting down deeper. It was banging in the cover, kind of like you would fish a crankbait, right? It was banging and getting in the cover. Whereas the 3/8 ounce that I was throwing was just not getting down deep enough and not banging the cover. And so I wasn't catching them. And that is a real difference maker, is make sure you're using the right weight to get to that area of where those bass are going to be. You know, they make the jackhammer, I think, in 1.5 ounces now, where it can get down 20 feet, 25 feet. But the thing is, that chatterbait, it climbs when you retrieve it. It's real crucial that you get a heavy weight to keep it at that level that you need it at to be able to catch them. And when I started learning what weights worked best to get to those different depths, that's when I really started catching them on a chatterbait in a variety of different situations. All right, mistake number 6. I was getting so frustrated. I remember a trip, I was out with my friend and I was catching them right on the chatterbait, but I literally missed 6 fish in a row. I'm not a bad fisherman, right? Like, I know how to catch fish. I've got thousands of them. I'm like, what is the deal? Is the blade popping open their mouth when I set the hook? How come these fish are getting off? I had a 3.5 pound smallmouth get off. I had a 5 pound largemouth just chuck it. And I was just like devastated. I'm like, this bait sucks. It doesn't hook them up. What is my problem? I even have GoPro chest footage. I'm like, man, I am setting the hook on these. Like, I am getting them. What's the deal? So I want to go back to a little bit to my story about Brett Height. So I reached out to him and I'm like, yo, Brett, I'm throwing your lure that you created and I'm getting tons of bites, but they are getting off. What is the deal? How come I can't hook them? And he said, your problem is your rod. You gotta use a moderate action 7'3" kind of crankbait rod, because what that does, it allows them time for them to get the whole bait before you pull on them. And I found that so fascinating. And when he told me that, that made a lot of sense, because my friend that was with me, he doesn't have the hook set that I have. And he wasn't losing the fish like I was. He was just kind of reeling, oh, I got one, you know? And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to try that. So I ponied up, bought a $150 crankbait rod, moderate action, 7'3". I'll leave a link to the one I purchased down below. And holy cow, my next trip throwing the chatterbait, I stuck that 4-pounder that got off before and he didn't get off. He stayed on there, threw in the same spot, caught a 3.5-pounder. He didn't get off either. Like, I missed very, very few fish when I switched my rod, and it just kind of blew my mind. Like, wow, that's amazing. So make sure you thank Brett Height for sharing that tip with me so that I could share it with you. The dude literally has his name on the package of that chatterbait and it smokes him. Kind of a bonus tip that you might have picked up on through this video, but I want to be real clear on, is I fish a chatterbait like it's a crankbait. It sounds weird. A crankbait is a vibrating, it actually feels the same as a crankbait a lot of time, like, because it just wobbles like that. You fish it like a crankbait, and what that means is, you know, parallel casts, make sure you're banging cover, that kind of stuff. That's how I think of chatterbaits now, is they're like 4-wheel drive crankbaits to put in places that you can't put a crankbait. Tell me what other mistakes you've seen people make or you've made with fishing chatterbaits. I want to do another chatterbait video. So the best comment I feel like is the best, I'll expound on. I want to help you catch more fish. Don't forget to check out this other video right here. This is another one that people have found really helpful to improve their bass fishing with specific techniques. So check that out. And as always, stay stoked. Late.